Welcome everyone. We'll go through some intros, but we're just going to be talking about design principles. We're going to be going through the Norfolk City Guide and going through sort of Ophelie's experience with taking the guide in-house, which was quite the production, as I understand. And yeah, I feel like we can probably just jump right into it. So my name is Derek Sharpe. I am the Director of Brand at Crowdriff.
Hi everyone. So my name is Ophélie Livec. I work at Visit Norfolk. I'm originally from France and work in DMO in France.
So we do have an agenda, believe it or not. We're trying to be organized if we can. So like I said, we're going to be talking about a bunch of different design principles, design fundamentals, everything from repetition, white space, hierarchy. Some of my favorite parts of this are going to be about typography because it makes a huge difference in your content, especially long form content. It's amazing. And then we'll save a little bit of time for Q&A. Before you even get into the design, it's super important that you speak to people and you understand, what are you trying to design for? Let's jump into some of the design principles. So I'm going to walk through a few of these design principles. We're going to bring it back down to earth with the Norfolk City Guide, and then we'll get to some typography, and yeah, that'll be it. So first principle, contrast. I'm sure if any of you have any experience with like websites or anything like that, you're probably aware of the importance of accessibility. A large part of that is color contrast, meaning are things legible? Can you actually understand any of the content that's on there because you can read it? That's a really good example of contrast as a basic principle, but really it's just the striking difference between two things. So you can see the example here with the little circle, but it can also be, in typography with serif versus a sans serif. For those who don't know, serif has the little embellishments on it as the sans does not. Big versus small, dark versus light, any of that type of stuff, that's all contrast. So an example from the Norfolk City Guide that we pulled, this was the actual example. I butchered it over here just to make a point. But basically you can see the high contrast in the color with the typography, and it makes it really bold, and it also makes it accessible, which is super important. Yeah, just so people can actually read your content. So repetition seems pretty simple. And repetition is really, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's repeating a certain thing. It's reusing the same or similar elements throughout a composition. And the reason that this is important is because it creates consistency. And really one of the kind of through lines of all of these, I guess, design principles is you're trying to take the cognitive load off of someone that's trying to understand your content, right? So by doing repetition, we create a pattern, we make it a little bit easier to focus on the content itself as opposed to trying to navigate through it. So easy example of this, which all of you have probably experienced recently, would be at the airport, right? Or any kind of public place. Signs follow a certain convention, and the reason for that is so that you, not just to make them look pretty, even though I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but it's so that you can immediately recognize where you are and you can navigate through a space. And it's the same with digital content, physical, all that type of stuff. So again, bringing it back to the city guide, Ophélie was able to kind of create this by making different styles for the subheads, for the body copy, for the headers, and all sorts of things like that. And I think that was able to be supported by some of the software, correct?
Yes, you can do that anywhere and through any designs now. Canva, you can just Word, a Word document. You can create those header types just so they repeat throughout your content. It's the same size, same color, so people don't get lost in your content with different sizing, different messaging. So that's great tools now. We have access, we can access.
Yeah. Okay. One of the biggest things that I see when slide decks come across my desk is lack of alignment. So obviously alignment with your team and all that type of stuff is great as well. But alignment in design is basically when something follows a certain path or a certain invisible line, and yeah, aligns multiple elements. So this is sort of represented in a number of different ways. But as you can see here, another example from the Norfolk Guide. Looks like a great page. Again, it follows some patterns and some consistencies. But if you actually kind of tidy it up and align it to a certain grid structure, it becomes a lot more easy to read and a lot more easily digestible. You can see with this example, it follows the vertical lines here and the horizontal. And what a lot of people don't understand about certain compositions in design is that typically it follows a grid structure. And again, it's one of those things where if you do that, it just takes that cognitive load off of people. They're able to know exactly where they need to go next. But one of my favorite tools in Google Slides, which is my preferred slide, I don't know, creator of choice, is the align tool. So you're like, Derek, how are we going to align these things? I don't have pixel perfect vision. You know what I'm saying? So you can actually select all these different items. You can right click and there will be an align tool right there that will help you out. And this is in most design software, most kind of slide software. And again, I'll provide this in a bit of a document afterwards.
Yeah.
This is only second to the distribute tool. Believe it or not, there's actually a tool for this as well. So even if it's all aligned, maybe they're kind of like the spacing is uneven in between, you can hit the distribute tool and it will automatically do that. And white space, and despite the name, white space doesn't mean literal white space, even though it does in this particular slide, but it basically means negative space. So it's the space that kind of elements are not inhabiting. And this is super important because this helps to draw the eye, create focal points, and create balance within any type of composition. So probably the easiest or maybe most known example of this would be Google. So you can see we have Yahoo, no offense, Yahoo, on this side, and we have Google on this side. And you can see with Yahoo, they're kind of giving you all of the information at once. It's kind of a lot to look at. You're like, I'm not really sure what story is most important here. Whereas if you think about what you're trying to do when you're in a search engine, you're trying to find something, right? So what Google's done is they've eliminated all of that visual noise and they just give you exactly the path that you're looking for, which is, I need to find something, let me put it in the search bar. And you can see all of that white space around the search bar. It's not dead space or anything like that. It actually creates that focal point and draws you in and feeds you exactly where you need to go. That's going to help you kind of, find something on the internet. The next one is hierarchy. Hierarchy is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically choosing what information or what content is prioritized over other content. And again, goes back to leading people through in the way that you would like them to absorb the content. So an example of this, I made this super cool design here, but this is an example of a lack of hierarchy, right? So we have the text on the left-hand side, we have the image on the right-hand side. They're both sort of the same. They take up the same visual space, but the text is treated exactly the same compared to if we did something like this, where we utilize principles of scale and color, and we kind of use that white space to frame the content on the left-hand side. It's a lot easier to digest. It's a lot easier to know, oh, I'm reading crowd riff first, then maybe I'm looking at the photo, then I'm reading the rest of the content. Yeah, so those, again, are a number of different design principles. And like I said, we'll be following up with some kind of take-home documents with even more, and you'll be able to kind of go through those. But I did want to wrap this up. Well, we'll do some Q&A afterwards, but I did want to get into typography because it is so important. I'm telling you, people, first thing I'll talk about is line length. Basically, if your line length is too narrow, the eye is going to travel back and forth too often. It's going to break up the reader's rhythm. If it's too wide, then it's hard to focus on the text because you're kind of like reading this long line. You can imagine in a large body of copy coming back. I'm sure you've all experienced this. And you go to the next line and be like, wait a minute, is that the next line or did I jump a line? You know what I'm saying? But of course, when it's the perfect length, which is at the bottom here, then the reader is able to get into a natural rhythm of reading, easily know exactly where they are, and again, navigate that content and focus on the content itself. Cool. The next one, this is one of my favorites, line height. It's the space between lines of copy. You can see an example of that up top here. Now it says 100%, 150, and 250. Basically what that means is the space in between the lines is the same with the 100% as the actual lines themselves. So 100, you can see it's a bit tight. Even some of these letters are kind of touching each other. Compared to the 150, it's given a little bit more space. It's a lot more easy to recognize like which line you're jumping to when you're reading through it. And then of course, 250, it's a bit excessive. It's like a lot of space, maybe a little bit too much. So I would aim for like 150%. But one interesting thing to note here is that's like an example of body copy. Now, when you see an example of an actual header or a title versus body copy, typically you want the header to be slightly less than the body copy itself. So on the left-hand side, that is 150 for the title and for the body copy compared to the right-hand side where the header is at 100% and the body copy is at 150. So you can see that kind of noticeable difference there. Reason for this, it's just larger. It's larger, so the space is going to be larger as well and more exaggerated.